If you recall from the first video on the different tissue types, there were four main tissue types. We broke epithelial tissue down and we said that there are a variety of different epithelial types and how we can classify them. We can classify them as simple. We can classify them as stratified. We can be pseudo-stratified. And there is something known as transitional. So there's four main types of epithelial tissue. Now, our simple epithelium basically refers to it being one cell layer thick. There's one cell layer. Stratified means that it's more than one cell layer. So more than one cell layer. So what does that mean? Imagine that we are looking through our tube here, our duct, right? The center, remember here, this is the lumen, okay? And that is going to be surrounded by an epithelium, okay? And remember from a previous video, the epithelium has polarity associated with it. It has an apical side and it has a basal side. So if I draw a line from the basal side up to the apical side, I pass through one cell. Okay, I only pass through one cell if each one of these, put some nuclei in there, are individual cells. Okay, but what happens if, let's say, I draw my tube like this, and let's draw some individual cells now where it looks maybe something like this. Okay, now I'm not going to finish it off, but if I draw a line from the basal side up to the apical side, I'm going to pass through two cell layers. Okay, so because I pass through two cell layers, this is sort of a stratified epithelium. So the other way that we can sort of draw this is if we say, okay, here is our epithelium in sort of a longitudinal or a lateral section, right? And we draw some cells like so, and I say that this is my basal side, this is my apical side. I go through one cell, and that's my simple. If I come over here and I draw my epithelium, and I draw my basal side, and I draw my apical side, draw some cells, but this time I stack them like so. Now, when I go from the basal side to the apical side, I go through two cell layers. So that's what we call our stratified epithelium. Okay? Now, our pseudostratified epithelium is a little bit different because the pseudostratified epithelium is, by definition, one cell layer thick. So notice over here that all the cells touch that basement membrane. So imagine that our basement membrane is down here. Okay, all the cells touch the basement membrane. But over here, if my basement membrane is here, okay, notice that this one touches, but this one doesn't. This one touches, this one doesn't. So in a stratified epithelium, not every cell touches the basement membrane. Now, if we look at this pseudostratified epithelium, what it's going to look like is something like this. And the nuclei are going to set like so. Okay, and we can even have some where it's like this, where we'll have something like that. Okay, like so. Now notice that these cells look as if I draw a line from here to here, from my basal to my apical side. I go through 1, 2 cell layers. So it looks like these cells are stacked up on one another. But if I look closely, that cell, that cell, that cell, they all touch the basement membrane. Every single cell touches the basement membrane. So if they all touch the basement membrane, right, it looks like they're stacked, but it's false stacking. So that's what we call a pseudo-stratified epithelium. Okay? And the last type, this transitional epithelium, this is one that is sort of stratified, but what happens is these top cells are like dome-shaped like this. And that's because they are like compressed, because transitional epithelium has the ability to stretch. So transitional epithelium, remember, transitional epithelium can stretch. Okay? And when we look at the transitional epithelium, because it can stretch, when it's not stretched out, the lumen is always star-shaped. So that's going to be a key identifier to help us, right? But it looks stratified, and that apical cell layer is sort of dome-shaped. Okay? Now, when we look at our epithelium, the other way that we can classify epithelium is based off of the cell shape. Okay? We can base it off of our cell shape. So cells can be flat or scale-shaped, and we call those squamous cells. They can be cube-shaped. We don't call them square because this is 3D. They're cubed, so this is a cuboidal cell. Or they can be tall, and they can look like columns. And so this is what we call a columnar cell. Okay? So whenever we classify our epithelial tissue, we classify it based off of cell layers, and then we also classify it based off of cell shape. Okay, so we might say something like a simple squamous epithelium. So that means it is one cell layer thick and the cells are flat. I could say a stratified cuboidal. And in stratified cuboidal, it's more than one cell layer thick and the cells are cube-shaped. Like so. But what happens if I end up in a situation that looks something like this? Where here's my basal side, here's my apical side up here. Okay, this is a stratified epithelium because as I go through, I can pass through multiple cells, right? And not every cell, like this cell up here, does not touch the basement membrane. This one does, this one doesn't. So this is a stratified epithelium. Now, if we look at this cell down here, this is a cuboidal cell. But if I look at this cell up here, this is a squamous cell. When we classify our epithelium based off of cell shape, we always use the apical cell layer. So this is a stratified squamous epithelium, okay, because we base it off of the apical cell layer. Okay, now when we look at our different epithelial types, pseudostratified tends to be columnar. Okay, pseudostratified is going to be columnar epithelium. So if you see columnar, always be on the lookout for that pseudostratified, right? And then transitional is always cuboidal in cell shape, right? So we don't say transitional cuboidal, we just call it transitional. Okay, so those are just some anomalies that you may see, but that is how we classify our different epithelia. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at an image of some of these different epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissue is classified on the number of cell layers thick. If it's one, we call it a simple epithelium. If it's more than one cell layer thick, we call it a stratified epithelium. And then we also classify it by how the cell shape, what the cells look like. Squamous cells are flat cells. They're wider than they are tall, so wider than they are tall. Our cuboidal cells are equally wide as they are tall, and then our columnar cells are taller than they are wide, so taller than they are wide. Right, so here we have a simple squamous epithelium. This is one cell layer thick. Here's the basement membrane, the basal side, the apical side, one cell layer thick, and it is a wide and flat cell, so simple squamous. Here we have simple cuboidal, basement membrane, apical layer, one cell layer thick, cells equally wide as they are tall. And then here we have simple columnar. Here's the basement membrane down here. Cells are taller than they are wide, so this is a simple columnar epithelium. Here we have a stratified squamous epithelium. So stratified, it's more than one cell layer thick, basement membrane, apical layer up here. And our apical cells, remember when we classify cell shape, we take the apical cell layers in a stratified epithelium. So they are wider than they are tall. So this is a stratified squamous epithelium. Here we have stratified cuboidal, more than one cell layer thick, cells equally wide as they are tall. And then down here we have our stratified columnar epithelium, cells more than one cell layer thick, and cells that are taller than they are wide on the apical layer. Okay, now down here what we have is our pseudostratified epithelium. So notice, right, if I draw a line from like here to here, I pass through two cells, and it looks like these nuclei are on top of one another, but what you can see is that this cell here touches the basement membrane, and so does this one. So every cell touches the basement membrane, and so that by definition can't be stratified, because in our stratified epithelium the apical cells do not touch the basement membrane. So this is pseudo-stratified. And then imagine there is another one that's not pictured here. That's our transitional epithelium that has those dome-shaped cells that has the ability to stretch and expand. So those are the different types of epithelial tissue. Now, when you look at your epithelial tissue, the different types of epithelium, let's go ahead and move me over here, right? Our different types of epithelium are going to have different locations, and they're going to have different functions. And you can take a look at this and think about it just generally. We'll talk about it more when we get to physiology, but like your squamous epithelium isn't very thick. Things can pass through it very easily, whereas we get down to like your stratified epithelium, it's more than one cell layer thick, so it can afford to be damaged and hurt a little bit because the apical cell layers can just slough off and we can replace them, and it doesn't hurt the underlying tissues. So that's going to be big in protection, right? So you can think about the cell thickness, the cell size, and make some pretty good hypotheses about what the functions are.